She reached for his coat with shaking hands, the man who spoke to no one. Finally whispered, "All right." The shot cracked the frozen air. A crow lifted from a dead juniper, black wings cutting the pale sky. Elias Crow lowered his rifle slowly, the barrel smoking against the cold. He hadn't meant to shoot, it was an old reflex, a ghost twitch from war. But the sound had already gone rolling across the white basin, echoing off the red cliffs like a warning. Then he saw her. A small figure moving near the river bend, stumbling through the snow. The sun was low, turning everything the color of rusted iron. She fell once, then again, until she stopped moving altogether. For a long while, Elias didn't breathe. He had seen enough bodies freeze stiff in this country to know when life left the skin. But there was something in the way her hand still clawed at the snow, reaching forward even in collapse. He slung the rifle over his shoulder, cursing under his breath. The cabin was half a mile upslope, the light dying fast. He walked anyway. Boots sank deep, snow groaning beneath his weight. Wind came down from the mesa, dry and sharp as bone. When he reached her, she was barely conscious, face cracked with cold, eyes clouded. She whispered something he couldn't catch. Her fingers, blue and trembling, reached for his coat. He froze. For 3 years, no one had touched him. Not since the fire at Bosque Station, not since the screams that still came back in dreams. Her hand clutched his sleeve as if she were grasping the edge of life itself. "Don't," he muttered, half to her, half to the ghosts in his head, but he lifted her anyway. She was light, brittle, like carrying a bundle of dry reeds. Her breath came in short bursts against his neck. As he trudged uphill, the wind picked up, flinging snow into his eyes. Each gust carried whispers, his name, his guilt, the sound of command shouted over burning fields. At the cabin door, he kicked it open, the hinges crying out. The fire inside was almost dead, only embers left. He laid her down on the floor, stripped off her wet coat and threw a blanket over her. Her lips moved again, a word surfacing through frostbite and fear. "Please." Elias crouched beside her, watching the flame flicker across her face. The wind outside keened against the walls like it was warning him to stay silent, to stay apart. He poured a cup of water and pressed it to her mouth. She drank weakly, eyes fluttering open. "Name's Nora," she breathed. He didn't answer. He just sat there, watching the firelight touch her pale skin, feeling something crack quietly inside his chest. Outside, the storm deepened. Snow hissed against the window. He thought the night would swallow them both. It didn't. The wind scraped across the roof through the night, a thin metallic sound that never stopped. Elias sat by the fire, boots still on, rifle propped beside the door. The woman, Nora, slept on his cot, her breath shallow but steady. Steam rose faintly from her blanket where the heat reached her. At dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the world buried and still. The horizon was a clean blade of white and gold. Elias stepped outside, scanned the ridge, saw no tracks but his own. Safe enough for now. He split wood until his hands numbed again, just to keep them busy. When he came back in, she was awake. Her eyes found him like a question she didn't dare ask. "You live here alone?" she said, voice rough, unsure. He nodded once. "Don't talk much," she managed a weak smile. "I can tell." He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. She tried to hold it steady, but her hands shook. When she burned her fingers and flinched, he reached out, reflexively steadying her wrist. Her pulse fluttered beneath his calloused thumb. He drew his hand back as though scalded. "Where were you headed?" he asked. "South," she said. "Supposed to meet a wagon train near White Mesa. Never found it. Lost the horse yesterday." He nodded again. Outside, the wind picked up, throwing dust across the window. For a long time, there was only the fire. Then she noticed the old map nailed to the wall. Creases, bloodstains, a line drawn in red ink down from Fort Sumner. "You fought?" she said quietly. He didn't look at her. "Long time ago. You still carry it?" His eyes flicked to the rifle. "It carries me." Something passed between them then, recognition, maybe pity. She looked down, fingers curling around the warm cup. "Thank you," she said. He shrugged, uncomfortable. "You'd have frozen." "That's still saving," she murmured. He didn't reply. The words hung in the cabin air, heavy as smoke. Later, while she slept again, he sat by the window watching the ridge. A hawk circled above the canyon, slow and patient. He envied it. The clean solitude, the certainty of its place in the cold air. but when he turned, her blanket had slipped off her shoulder. He stood, hesitated, then lifted it back over her gently. She stirred but didn't wake. Outside, the snow began to melt in thin rivulets along the slope. Water ran toward the river, whispering under the crust of ice. It sounded like something starting, though neither of them would have called it that. Morning light crawled across the floorboards, and the silence between them deepened. Not the empty kind, but the waiting kind. The thaw had begun. By the third day, the snowpack had begun to loosen its grip on the earth. Meltwater dripped from the eaves like a slow clock. The air smelled of pine pitch and cold iron. Inside the cabin, the rhythm of survival had returned. Firewood stacked, coffee boiled. Silence held like a fragile truce. Elias mended a broken stirrup by the hearth while Nora studied the battered letter she carried. The paper was soft, nearly translucent from folding. She ran her thumb over the words again and again, her eyes darting as if she could read them by will alone. "You can't read?" he asked quietly. She shook her head. "My husband could. He wrote this before. Before the fire, Elias said nothing. The sound of his knife trimming the leather strap filled the space between them. Finally, she looked up. "Would you read it?" He froze. The idea of another person's grief in his mouth made his throat tighten. But she was waiting. He took the letter, unfolded it carefully, and began. It was a simple message. A man's farewell to a woman he loved. An apology for leaving too soon. A promise that she'd find her way through the ashes. When he finished, she sat motionless, eyes glistening, lips pressed together. "Thank you," she whispered. Elias folded the paper again, sliding it back to her. "He was a good man. You didn't know him," he met her gaze. "I can tell." Outside, a crow landed on the woodpile and croaked once, a dry, cracked sound. She smiled faintly. "That bird's been following me since the ridge." "They do that," he said. "Stick around things that might die." Her smile faltered, but she didn't look away. "And you? You stick around things that might live?" He almost laughed, a sound rusty from disuse. "Don't reckon I've tried that in a while." That night they shared supper in quiet. The stew was thin, mostly beans and memory. But as she spoke, telling him of her homestead, her garden, the small peach tree that somehow bloomed each spring despite drought, he listened, really listened for the first time in years. When she laughed softly at something she remembered, the cabin seemed to warm. Later, when he went outside to check the traps, the stars were sharp as glass. He could hear the river again under the ice, restless, alive. He looked back at the cabin window. Her silhouette moved across the light, slow and sure. For a moment, the silence inside him shifted. Not gone, but no longer absolute. Something had found a way in. The thaw came sudden and harsh, as if winter had decided to leave all at once. Streams carved through the snowfields, the sound of running water rising like a restless murmur through dry hollow. The ground turned to mud around the cabin, and the river swelled, carrying broken limbs and the occasional carcass of winter's failure. Elias went out early to fetch wood from the shed. When he came back, Nora was standing by his trunk, his only locked thing. The lid was open. His medals lay scattered across the floor, along with the yellowed clipping that bore his name. Elias Crow, wanted for desertion and murder, 1865. Her face was pale, her eyes unreadable. "You didn't tell me." He set the wood down slowly. "Didn't seem worth telling. You killed people." He nodded once. "So did everyone in that war. You burned homes," she said. Her voice trembled now. "You burned families." He met her eyes, steady but hollow. "Orders came down. I followed them. Too well." The wind moved through the open door, rattling the loose boards. The smell of wet earth filled the air, heavy and sour. "Who gave you the right to survive?" she whispered. "No one," he said. "That's why I came here." She turned away from him, clutching the letter to her chest. Her husband's words, those soft lines of forgiveness, seemed to mock her now. "How many houses?" she asked. "Enough to never sleep right again." She shook her head, stepping toward the door. "I trusted you." He didn't move. "You shouldn't have." The silence stretched until it hurt. The world outside was loud with meltwater and crows. She walked out, boots sinking into the mud, the letter clenched in her hand like a weapon. Elias stood in the doorway, watching her go. He wanted to call after her, to say something human, but all that came to his lips was the old reflex of command. Useless now, Inside, the fire died slow. The metals caught the last of the light, dull glints in the dirt. He crouched and picked one up, rubbed the tarnish with his thumb, then let it fall again. The river roared louder, closer. It sounded like judgment. By dusk, the cabin was dark. He sat by the window, staring at the tracks she'd left in the mud until the rain washed them away. He thought that might be mercy. It wasn't. By morning, she was gone. No sign but the faint line of her boots, half filled with meltwater and vanishing into the trees. The river had broken loose during the night, ice cracking like gunfire, the current tearing through everything that tried to hold. Elias watched from the porch as the last fragments of white disappeared downstream. He didn't eat, didn't light the stove. The silence in the cabin was absolute again, the kind that hummed behind the ears until it felt like pressure. He tried to busy himself, fixing a broken hinge, cleaning his rifle, but his hands wouldn't steady. When he reached for a nail, it slipped and sliced his thumb. The blood welled bright against the gray of the wood. He stared at it for a long time before wiping it away. By midday, he packed a small satchel. A blanket, a tin of jerky, no weapon. He left the door open behind him and started toward the ridge, following where her tracks had gone before the snowmelt claimed them. The country stretched wide and empty, the mesas rising like drowned monuments. Ravens wheeled overhead, their cries sharp and distant. Each step sank in mud. Each breath tore at his throat. He'd once led men across hundreds of miles of country just like this. Men who'd looked to him for direction, for orders that got them killed. Now he walked alone, and for the first time he didn't want to be followed. He reached the river by dusk. Its banks were raw, newly carved. Trees leaned half uprooted in the current. Across the water he saw the faint glow of a campfire flickering low. For a heartbeat he thought it might be her, but when he called her name just once the echo came back thin and mocking. Only the wind answered. He crossed anyway. The water bit into his legs, snowmelt cold, carrying silt and bits of ice. By the time he reached the far side, his boots were heavy, his breath ragged. He stumbled up the slope until he found a flat rock and sat there, staring out over the valley. The stars came one by one, sharp and indifferent. He spoke softly, not to her, not to anyone, but to the night itself. "I followed orders," he said. "That's what they all told me to do. Follow, don't think." The wind hissed through the sagebrush. He bowed his head. No more following. When the first flakes began to fall again, light, almost tender, he didn't move. His body shivered, but it was the sound of the river that steadied him, the endless rush of it. Somewhere in that sound he thought he could hear forgiveness or maybe just exhaustion. He closed his eyes. For a moment he imagined her voice carried on the current, calling him back. He opened them again to nothing. The night held him cold and patient. When dawn broke, Elias was half buried in snow, his coat stiff with frost. The world had gone quiet again, the storm retreating into the high mesas. He rose slowly, legs trembling, joints aching from the cold. He turned toward the cabin, though he didn't know if it was still standing or if she'd be there at all. The walk back took most of the day. He followed the river south, boots dragging through crusted ice. Somewhere near midday, he saw something pale caught on a fallen branch, a scrap of fabric torn and fluttering. He knew it before he touched it, the hem of Nora's shawl. His heart kicked hard in his chest. He found her a mile downstream, collapsed near the bend where the river curved through the rocks. The current had soaked her skirts. Her lips were blue. She was still breathing, barely. He knelt beside her, pressed his fingers to her throat, and felt that stubborn pulse, weak, defiant. "Nora," he said. The word came out hoarse, as if unused for years. Her eyes fluttered open but didn't focus. He lifted her into his arms the way he had the first night and started back upriver. The snow had turned to slush. Every step was a fight. His breath came ragged. He stumbled once, nearly fell, but held her tighter. At the cabin, he kicked the door open again and laid her by the fire. Her skin was ice. He stripped the wet clothes from her, wrapped her in every blanket he owned, and fed the stove until it roared. Steam rose off her hair as warmth returned in trembling waves. Hours passed. He sat beside her, feeding her spoonfuls of water, whispering words he didn't know he remembered. At last she stirred, blinked, and tried to speak. Her hand fumbled for her letter. He helped her hold it. "It's his words," she said weakly. "Read them again." He did. His voice was steadier this time, the words clearer. When he finished, she reached up, touched his wrist. "He forgave you," she said, her eyes fixed on his. He wrote it for me, but it's for you too, isn't it? He wanted to argue, to deny it. Instead, he nodded once. The fire crackled loud in the quiet. She smiled faintly, exhaustion softening her features. Then we can stay, she murmured. Just until spring. He didn't answer. He couldn't. Outside, the thaw deepened. Water ran under the snow like veins beneath skin. The first bird call in weeks broke the air, thin, uncertain, but alive. Elias sat beside her until her breathing evened out, until the cabin's heat felt like mercy instead of punishment. He looked toward the window where night was folding over the valley, and for the first time in years he whispered something soft enough only she could hear. All right. It wasn't surrender. It was survival. Spring arrived quietly, like someone easing open a door to see if the house still stood. The snow withdrew up the ridges, leaving earth that smelled of rust and roots. The river ran full but calm now, its surface a mirror of pale sky. Elias worked the soil outside the cabin, breaking the hard crust with an old spade. His hands were cracked, his shoulders stiff, yet something in the rhythm steadied him. Beside the cabin, Nora sat mending his torn coat, the one she had once reached for in fear. She hummed under her breath, tuneless but soft. They spoke little. The days didn't need words anymore. He cut logs, she planted seeds in the thawed ground. At dusk they sat by the riverbank, watching the light drain from the mesas. Coyotes called in the distance, thin, mournful sounds that somehow no longer felt lonely. Once, as he repaired the fence, she came up behind him, holding the letter. "I've read it enough," she said. "I think he'd want it buried." He nodded. Together they dug a small hole near the peach sapling she'd planted. She folded the paper once more, pressed it into the dirt, and covered it gently with her palm. Then she looked at him. "It's time," she said. Elias didn't ask what for. He only bowed his head a little, as if in prayer, though he no longer believed in such things. The breeze stirred, carrying the scent of damp earth and wood smoke. That evening, as the first frogs began to sing by the water, she brought his coat to him. The torn lining was mended, the fabric brushed clean. "You should wear it again," she said. He looked at it for a long moment before taking it. "Didn't think I'd need it anymore." "You still do," she replied. "The nights are cold," he slipped it on. The fit was the same, but it felt different, lighter somehow. She reached for his sleeve, the same gesture as before, but this time her hand was steady. The fire inside the cabin burned low. They stood near it, neither speaking. The wind crept through the open door, cool and easy, carrying the faint scent of new grass. He looked at her then, really looked. Her face was thin, the lines of hardship still there, but her eyes held something he recognized, the quiet strength of someone who had stopped running. His breath caught, and he whispered, "All right." She smiled. The word wasn't permission or forgiveness or confession. It was simply the sound of peace returning. Later, when the fire dimmed and night fell fully, the world outside hummed with small life. The land that had once punished now seemed to breathe alongside them. Elias sat on the porch long after she went to sleep, watching the stars rise. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The silence between heartbeats was enough. Somewhere in that stillness, the past settled into the dust where it belonged. The wind moved through the pines, and this time, it sounded like home.